Okay, so the next thing I'm going to talk about is the terminals, and I'm going to try to get through this really fast. Basically, a terminal can be destroyed. It has a virtual callback on terminate. It has deregister for automated, register for automated, which is virtual, and the game object that actually does automatic registering and deregistering. It has a bool mark for termination to see if it's already marked. It has an external management function that just says, when I get destroyed, where do I send this to? Which function do I send this to? And that's in the factory. Send to external management just uses that function to send it. Has external managers just outside used for checking to see if it has management. Set external management. So set external management basically says it has external management and sends it to the. It has external management, gets that function, stores it, and then deregisters for termination dumpster because it's no longer internally managed. Send to external manager just marks this for termination equals to false, and then sends it to that function. And mark for destroy is just registering for termination. And the termination manager, the way it works is basically you have deregister and register. Register is the only one that can be called because once you're in the function, you can no longer deregister yourself from the terminable manager. So and we have processes terminations, and that's pretty much the meat. And the meat is just basically when this is at every frame, when the termination list isn't empty, call the callback called onTerminate and deregister from automatic, which if you're a game object means deregister from update and all that other stuff. If you're terminable, that means if you're just the terminable and not a game manager, nothing is going to be called because there's nothing in the terminable. And then it says, okay, now what do I do with it? Do I send it to the external manager or do I just delete it now? If I delete it now, then that just means deregister from the actually it just means destroy now, which is the terminable, but I'll talk about that in a bit. But that's pretty much all the terminable manager does, is just empties that list. So now I'll talk about the terminable dumpster because it's part of the termination system. The terminable dumpster pretty much has a few functions. Destroy now, which basically just removes that from the list and deletes the target because all the game objects are automatically registered to terminable. All the terminables are automatically registered to the termination dumpster. You can register to the dumpster, which is automatically done at the initialization of terminables. You destroy, deregister from the dumpster is just removing it from the dumpster, and then that's pretty much all the dumpster is. Once you actually clear the dumpster, it's going to go through all the active terminables and then just delete them all. And the way I have an example for the management. So an example of the recycling factory I have is the recycling bomb factory. And basically whenever you create a new bomb, you set that external manager to recycle bomb. In this case, that's a function. And it tells it to push it to the recycling lists. So that's pretty much how you set the external manager. And then you have to call initialize, which is just, initializing all the things again. One thing to note that if you do decide to do a factory, then your registering for automated becomes your responsibility because we can no longer touch that internally. So that's why you have to call that into initialize function. So that's pretty much it. When you say set external management, it's gonna go do the external management stuff, deregister from termination dumpster, and now it's out of the loop. And just to show that this works, I basically have a bomb that when it collides with the bucket, the bucket is gonna mark for destroy and therefore register itself and then kill itself. That's just to show that the on terminate does work. The mark for destroy works, and on terminate, it's gonna cancel alarm and deregister. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do that. So it calls on terminate and it just destroys it. So I just very quickly wanted to go over what a termination dumpster does, and that's basically holds all of the terminables so that it can clean them up at the end of the of a scene change or just getting rid of the game. And that's because the user, it's not very responsible sometimes, so we have to be nice to the system. So you can register to the dumpster, which every terminal pulls automatically, and deregister from dumpster, which is private, and that's only because you can only deregister from dumpster if you're being set to an external management. And destroy now just destroys that immediately, as I probably already showed, but that's all it does. So I just wanted to very quickly show that the recycling, sending the external does work, and termination dumpster does work. So basically I do that by showing the deletions of the recycling factory and the termination dumpster. There should be a bomb which is managed by the recycling factory, and then these two, which is the bucket and the floor, should not be. So I'm going to end the game now, and that's going to cause that cycling. So we have one bomb, so that's one, and then the termination dumper has two, which is the floor and the bucket, and that's that. So it does work. The next thing I want to talk about is the scene manager, because the scene manager is actually what has direct contact with the scene. The update for the scene is called via the scene manager. So we have a set start scene, changing the scenes, registering, deregistering for all the various stuff, which is like input holes and etc., registering collision. Then we have like cleaning up the current scene, which is called when you exit the game, drawing scene, updating, etc., etc. So updating the current scene checks to see if the current scene is not equal to the next scene. So if the user changed scene because the next scene is actually just a pointer, just to show you, change scene actually just sets that next scene. So when a user calls change scene, it sets that current scene equals to the next one, and that way when it's on the update, it'll check to see if it should change scene. If so, then it's going to call the on scene end, which I talked about earlier, the callback for the scene ending, delete the current scene to free up memory, and then set the current scene to the next scene, and then set up that next scene, and then continue the regular updating process. So setting the start scene, because the game needs to know when to start the game, you have to set that target scene, and that's called pretty much in the game engine content. As you can see, I call it at the very end, start scene's a new tutorial. And in order to check that the changing scenes does actually work, I have it so that when the bomb reaches 10 seconds, it goes to the lose screen, and that's calling the actual scene change. I've already shown multiple scene changes, but I'll show it again. So there we go, it's just getting rid of everything, and then it's changing the scene. And that's it. That's pretty much all the scene changes. The next thing I want to talk about is the scene manager, because the scene manager is actually what has direct contact with the scene. The update for the scene is called via the scene manager. So we have a set start scene, changing the scenes, registering, deregistering for all the various stuff, which is like input holes and etc., registering collision. Then we have like cleaning up the current scene, which is called when you exit the game, drawing scene, updating, etc., etc. So updating the current scene checks to see if the current scene is not equal to the next scene. So if the user changed scene because the next scene is actually just a pointer, just to show you, change scene actually just sets that next scene. So when a user calls change scene, it sets that current scene equals to the next one, and that way when it's on the update, it'll check to see if it should change scene. If so, then it's going to call the on scene end, which I talked about earlier, the callback for the scene ending, delete the current scene to free up memory, and then set the current scene to the next scene, and then set up that next scene, and then continue the regular updating process. So setting the start scene, because the game needs to know when to start the game, you have to set that target scene, and that's called pretty much in the game engine content. As you can see, I call it at the very end, start scene's a new tutorial. And in order to check that the changing scenes does actually work, I I have it so that when the bomb reaches 10 seconds, it goes to the lose screen, and that's calling the actual scene change. I've already shown multiple scene changes, but I'll show it again. So there we go, it's just getting rid of everything, and then it's changing the scene. And that's it. That's pretty much all the scene changes. And I just wanted very quickly to show how the scene gets updated. So in the update, it goes to the scene update current scene, and in the draw, it goes to the scene draw current scene. And that's how it calls that current scene, and then it trickles down, and then it calls the managers and everything. One thing I forgot to mention is the game object, which is just very easy. All the game object is it's derived from collidable, inputable, updatable, drawable, alarmable, and terminable, and it has a few little extra kind of functions that I included myself. Those are just kind of like the shortcuts. So set game object world sets both the graphics object and the collision mesh to the same world. That way the player doesn't have to set both worlds at separate times. They could do it at once. I also have a set graphics and collision model, which just basically takes one graphics object and sets the graphics object and the collision model for it. And also we have register for automated, which is re-implemented from the terminable to tell it like when you die, to register from updating, to register from drawing, and the automated functions for a game object are updating and drawing. So another thing I wanted to mention, which I should have mentioned earlier in the asset manager, is something I created called graphics object maker, and that basically is just a factory for graphics objects, all types of graphics objects, and it also holds onto a reference to them, so that the user doesn't have to worry about deleting graphics object and everything. If it uses this graphics object maker system, which the user should, then they no longer have to worry about deleting, because once the graphics object is deleted, it'll pretty much just go through that list and call delete on every single graphics object that was made in the game. In addition to this, all of the helper functions that I had for setting like graphics objects or whatever, they check to see if the previous graphics weren't null. If it's not null, that means we have to clean it up. So then it calls remove graphics object, which just goes back to this factory and says, oh, okay, delete me, I'm no longer wanted at all. So the next thing I wanted to show was just the destruction and that everything gets called. So first it's going to call unload game content, which is just for the user, so I'm not going to worry about that. Then it's the asset delete me, scene manager delete me, time manager delete me, graphics object delete me, etc., etc. So I'm just going to run it and immediately close out, because that will cause a sorry, it has to, there you go. So now I have to call I'm calling each kind of delete. So first the recycling bomb is deleting everything just to show that the external functions are getting cleaned up too. That means calling all of the updatables, etc. Now we're deleting the asset manager, there we go. That cleans up all of the assets. Scene manager, which means it's going to call a bunch of things. So it's going to get the game object, terminable, alarmable, because it's cleaning up objects. I think this is a termination dumpster. Yep. So that was a dumpster. Now we have the terminable manager. Gets rid of those terminates because it doesn't own it. Getting rid of the collisions. So I'm assuming it's a collision system. Alarmables. Input manager, drawable manager, scene, and then finally the scene manager. Now we're going to go to the time manager. It's going to call the time manager. Graphics object maker, which is the thing I made, it's going to call that too. It gets rid of all the graphics objects. And then terminate context, which is just the other one. So it is calling destruction on every single of my systems. So I just wanted to go over a little bit of the documentation, just the structure of it. So for game object, we have the default events, which is just kind of like the updates and stuff. And then we have certain sections like drawing, collision, and that just is an indication of important stuff for it. So like if we go to register collision, um, it tells you what that thing does, and usually everything has an example, of a clear indication example of what it does and how to use it. Um, and I mean like everything that the user should be using has an example, just so that they can really know what's going on. And then Asset Manager, same thing. It shows you an example of how to do things. It tells you to use a graphics object maker too, stuff like that, for graphics related stuff, just things of that nature. So in addition to that, I also have kind of the things you can do. So creating a level, that's really important stuff. In the games object, the examples show you how to derive too. So, but this is very important. So I thought creating a level, it gives you an example, how to derive from it, and then the setup of the level. So setting the initial scene also tells you how to use the scene manager in the load game content to set it. Setting all the scenes collisions and important scenes functions like changing scenes on scene and startup, etc. All very detailed and laid out. And I also commented on every single class, so all of them should have it. The internal members are very brief. They just tell you kind of what they do and anything important just for myself, and then the game object user ones are very, very detailed.